So I think, for a working definition, a simplistic way for me to understand it, white privilege is the ability to avoid difficult conversations. It's the privilege that I have to not have to engage, to be able to create a world or to choose not to have to look at things that make me uncomfortable, that are hard, and to have that be normal, to kind of fashion a place, an experience, a lifestyle that is largely comfortable for me and that I can avoid the pain of other folks, particularly people of color. How do we respond to them?
I think I became aware of it. I mean, the full sense of the word aware was most likely recently, within the past month, of just understanding it. My personal experience, being a white woman and living in much of a bubble, seeing some of the things going on, talking about white privilege, all of that, seeing what happened with Freddie Gray and the Black Lives Matter movement when it first kind of kicked off at that time, understanding that there was an issue, but it wasn't until I really did some research in understanding what systemic racism entails. So one of the instrumental tools in that most recently was the documentary, The 13th. And before that, I had understood that, I'd heard about how our prison system, is part of the problem and is based in systemic racism. And I'm like, I understand that it disproportionately affects Black and brown communities, but I don't understand how the system is set up and what the systems are and what that really meant, like the term systemic racism. So I really needed to watch something that connected all the dots from slavery to today and how there are actual systems at play that kind of just lifted the veil. And then since then, I've just been understanding of all the systems that we have, that are a form of oppression.
I think there's a couple things that have collided for me over the last couple weeks. This pandemic that has kept me relatively secluded, sequestered from the rest of the world. I've been a captive audience to news headlines and social media. And so the things that are happening around me, there's not a lot of place for me to get away from that. It's in front of me, and I have to deal with it. I also live right in downtown Harrisburg, and so many protests go right by my house. And I was caught up in one coming back from a bike ride that kind of went sideways. It was a Saturday, and things started out peacefully and then got violent, unfortunately. But the sense of George Floyd and the pandemic has created a place where I think I know at a very personal level that what we do affects lots of other people, and also that we're afraid. I've never before in my life been in a situation where just my presence to other people is a lethal threat. I don't know whether or not I have COVID, and if I do, I'm an asymptomatic carrier. But I do know people have been afraid of me, that we've given each other distance and space. And while it's not the same thing as being afraid of the color of your skin, for a white person, it was one of the first times that I've ever actually seen people afraid of my presence in front of them. And it's given me kind of a different level, different way to engage a conversation about fear of the other, and particularly when other people are not like us.
Being in college, being on a football team, I played football in college, I ran track for a little bit, so I got a chance to be in the locker rooms and talk and have conversations with people. We'll go out to parties, and just the freedom that they have, again, people who are non-black in the sense what I'm talking about here, the freedom of expression and freedom of worry is something I only can imagine having. I'll go to a party and cops are outside, and I can tell the white kids, whatever, we're good. And I can look at all my friends doing nothing wrong, just doing the same thing at a party. It's tense. It's fear. It's fear. Okay, we got to go. I don't want to be here when they come in. Nothing's being done. But you can see that different world of our experiences dealing with cops in the black community compared to everybody else is not the same. Or being able to go to your friend's house and say, oh, you got a pool in the backyard, you can do this and go out with your friends, family, you can go spend some time with your family and your friends and go have sleepovers. That wasn't my reality growing up, because we had to be sheltered and be protected, because you never know what can happen compared to everybody else. And I'm talking to my friends, and it's, oh yeah, I can do whatever I want. My parents are gone, I can do this. Or you get pulled over by the cop is, oh, I'll talk to them, don't worry about it. It's confidence. And on my end, people that look like.
So I'm a white guy, but I'm a guy. So I'm not a white woman. Or I'm not a white non-binary person. So there's privileges that come with just me being a guy. Forget my whiteness, just being a guy. I'm a Christian. There's privileges that come with being a Christian. I'm straight. I'm middle class. I could go right down I'm abled. I could hit all of these different things. And so part of what's challenging is that what makes us who we are, there's a lot of things that make us who we are. We have this innate desire, I think we have to, as human beings, make sense of who we are. So we start to choose identities and tell stories about who we are, and we privilege some things over others. So if I'm white, people who are non-white are in the minority. If I'm straight, people who are not straight are in the minority. So there's this line of the privileged and those who are not privileged or oppressed. What's dangerous is when you start to put a moral compass on that too. And so now you're saying everything that's privileged is good and everything that's not privileged is bad. Or, as some, depending on your particular political side of things and your angle, if you're an activist, you may say, hey, everything that's privileged, that's bad, because everything that's not privileged is good. Well, that's not helpful, right? Simply flipping the binary of what's good and bad based on privilege and power, that doesn't make sense. These are different things, different lenses. We shouldn't confuse them. And education needs to help us understand how to tease those things apart. We also have to be much more critical about knowing what is intention versus impact. So in our society today, you'll hear people say, white people particularly, they'll do something or they'll say something, and that lands with a negative impact. It makes people feel hurt, oppressed, non-human. Does that make sense? That's the impact of what they say. But the intention also matters. White people might say stupid stuff. They might not have bad intentions, but the impact could be disastrous.
We were doing this project here in Harrisburg, and this is before I knew anything about Harrisburg, but we were coming to do a project here, and we were doing it on how parents perceived autism in their children and whether they got help or kind of like attention issues in their children, not even autism or ADHD yet, but how they perceived attention issues in their kids and what they were doing to kind of help their kids. And there was a kerfuffle over food. One of the community kind of connectors alerted the team, the research team that was coming in, that, they should bring certain kinds of food for the folks. If they're gonna bring certain kinds of food, bring this kind of food. It was like dinner food. It was like chicken and beans and like juice and stuff. So one of the times, the primary investigator on the project did just like completely disregarded the community food needs and was like, I'm bringing this. And so when we asked her why, she said, well, I was just watching out because I know that there's diabetes in the Black community. This is a white woman. And I said, I'm on the email because she copies me on the email to kind of like back her up. And I'm like, no. So I take the other person off the email. I was like, no. I said, if you ask somebody what they want to eat, which you did, and they tell you what they want to eat, I'm not sure why you think it's appropriate to then say, because of diabetes in the Black community, I'm bringing you Simply Lemonade instead. I'm not sure I'm not sure why that's appropriate. And I kind of like pushed back on her for that because she copied me on the email as like her black backup. And I was like, no, let's take this person off the email and let's deal with why you think it's appropriate to approach a community that way. And she ended up saying, I'm very glad that you were here. I had you to bounce this off of because I didn't know that was racially insensitive. And I was like, yeah, it's racially insensitive to say those kinds of things and assume something because you know of a statistic that may not even apply to the community. Yes, it's pretty racially insensitive. And steeped in this kind of, it's a different system, but a systemic ways of understanding Black people. They have, there's a lot of diabetes in the Black community, so, that's what we know about them kind of idea, instead of interrogating kind of our assumptions.
I have heard the term Karen. I just have to tell you, I feel bad for all the Karens out there who are not complete, I want to say trash, but I don't mean that in like a white trash. I mean, they just like don't care about other humans. Most of my younger friends will probably say I'm like slow on the uptick, especially hashtags or anything that's like kind of cultural. So I had to watch a few videos of like what a Karen is, and it's just becoming more present. I have never called the police on a Black man, doing whatever. I'm sure there are probably Karens in me, like different parts, that are implicit bias when I see someone who looks different than me and I'm in a situation that makes me feel uncomfortable. But I think in the larger context of Karen, I'm really understanding how white women have done some really horrible stuff throughout history that have caused undue harm specifically to Black men. I hope for those, I think the other thing is white liberals think that all Karens are like racist Trump supporters, and they're not. They're from all of the spectrum, all over the spectrum. So I don't know how you get rid of Karens. You just, there are Karens for everything.
I run a Facebook group called The Movement. A friend of mine, Brent, and we both run it. And one of our rules in the group is don't talk over Black people. Black people get talked over in every other space. Don't come here and talk over Black people. Listen to what Black people say. Listen to them. Talk to them. Don't talk over them. So no amount of don't talk over Black people to the folks who consider themselves liberal and white and down for the cause and Black Lives Matter, hashtag Black Lives Matter, works for some reason. If they are intent in talking over you, they will talk over you and tell you how to lead, tell you how to run things, no matter what. Like, it doesn't matter what you do. So we had this guy say, Black Lives Matter, but all racism is bad, and you guys need to call out all racism. Yes, I understand that you are experiencing discrimination as a white male in America. Don't even get me started on that. I understand that you're experiencing this, what you perceive as racism, but this particular group in this particular space is not for that. No, that doesn't work. It doesn't work when you as a leader, a Black or brown leader of a group, tries to set parameters and set boundaries. No, that is not what you should do. You should listen to us because you should be for all people. And I literally have to be like, you have to go. Like, if you are not about this cause and you're not about listening to Black and brown leaders in the community and understanding how they're asking you to help in the movement, then this is not the group for you. Go to the next group where they will take that. But more than anything, center Black voices in a Black movement. And this has been the big push in the last couple of weeks for us. Like, center Black and brown voices in a Black and brown movement. Do not come into a Black and brown space and try to tell them how they should do things from your perspective. You have every other part of the community to do that, and not here and not today. So we've experienced that a lot, like this kind of like idea that, folks they know best and will not listen to Black and brown leaders no matter what. And it's disheartening, but to that I'm just like, I know you're liberal, I know you mean well, but the other piece of this work is not centering yourself in the middle of the conversation every single time. And while I wouldn't call that the most overt kind of racism in the world, it's very harmful and it's very racially insensitive, especially when you're told. It becomes completely overt when you're asked and told several times not to do it, and you do it anyway. And like with my professor, like if I would have told her that was racially insensitive, and she was like, well, I'm still bringing this other food because black people need to not eat that stuff, that would have been pretty horrible. And that's what keeps happening in our group. Like, no matter how we say, let black folks lead, let us let you know how we need the help, let us let you know what needs to be done. No, we know better than you, and now you're discriminating against me because you're telling me that I'm wrong, which is completely outrageous and completely performative and just counterproductive to everything. But that's the kind of stuff you come up against that's steeped in kind of racist values and steeped in a dominant culture worldview that doesn't get called out enough. It just doesn't get called out enough. So we have a lot, especially in the last, what day are we on, 27? Yeah. On the 27th, since May 30th, to now, from the first protest at the Capitol steps to now, the very first one that Harrisburg had in this season, to now, it's been a lot of that. It's been a lot of kind of sussing out the folks who want to come in and tell you how to lead and draw attention back to this dominant culture perspective that's steeped in racism that nobody wants to interrogate. And we've had to do a lot of like cutting away to get out of that.
You know, it's tiring, and there's a sense of fatigue, but I'm super sensitive that there are communities that have dealt with this, particularly this narrative of suffering, in ways I never have. And I think there's a fragility with like white folks, white culture in general, that when things get uncomfortable, when we're exposed to suffering and hard things, just kind of shut down. Because we haven't had to develop the same kind of skills to be resilient. And furthermore, the kind of skills to actually stay engaged in the conversation and to do the work to understand it. Lazy culture, you know, stuff happens, we read about it, take a couple seconds, check out the headline, move on, think we know what we know. You know, think we're now educated, we can have a conversation about it. I think that's tokenizing. I think that's super simplistic, and it's the easy way out. But having said that, no person can study everything all the time and be an expert on their own. So we have to rely on others who've gone before us and who we trust to help us through that. And I think that's where really people of color and white folks need to come together, because we need to help balance out what we're experiencing in the news with human interaction, personal engagement, and experience. 'Cause nobody has the whole story.
Making people uncomfortable is not a bad thing. And the idea that it is what keeps systems in place. Making people uncomfortable is good. Growth comes out of uncomfortability. We cannot be scared to make people uncomfortable. We cannot be scared to feel uncomfortable. Now, depending on where you are at in the current time, I understand the idea of being safe and feeling safe, but intentionally making people, especially those who are used to being uncomfortable is a necessity. Because if people aren't uncomfortable, things won't change. If people are not uncomfortable, people will not grow. And that includes ourselves. I think it's something where if you really want to think about learning is about being uncomfortable. Continuous learning is about being uncomfortable. So I strongly suggest and believe that everyone should feel uncomfortable. And if you've had a long time and you haven't felt uncomfortable, maybe you should try to do something different because you're not growing. The ability to avoid uncomfortable situations is definitely one of the trademarks of white privilege. And you see it when you have a white friend. Like, I've had white friends who come to me to spaces that are primarily black, and they're like, ooh, I felt a certain way. And I'm like, what do you think my life is? And I'm like, oh, this little bit of uncomfortability that you felt is something new to you. Oh, now you get it. And that's where it comes. You realize you're like, oh, you really don't have to feel uncomfortable a lot of times. You really don't have to feel uncomfortable in the spaces around you. And again, I think that goes to growth, because not just, unfortunately, white people are allowed to do that a lot more, but I think that goes with anybody. There are some people who just stay in their comfort zone. Now, black people, because of the world around them, that comfort zone is a lot smaller. The part about white privilege is that comfort zone, the ability for that comfort zone is wide, right? All of America, all like 80% of the country, they can just stay in their comfort zone. And that's really what white privilege is. It's the percentage of time that you can just stay in that comfort zone without being challenged.
My lifelong journey is to become more vulnerable. I've had some experiences in life that have helped me to shut down. So it's that reopening process. So I'm already in a space of where I understand how being vulnerable will make my life so much better, and the experiences that I have and the relationships I have with other people. In the context of what's going on right now and understanding privilege and racial inequities and like all of the things, I realized, I think before when I had the conversation about white privilege, that question, it wasn't really a question. I was told to check my privilege by another white woman. And it just was, it wasn't a conversation at the point. I guess people would refer to it, as white fragility, because I got really upset because I was like, you're completely negating every experience I've ever had in this conversation. It's not a conversation. You are shaming and guilting me into a space where I don't personally feel like lasting change comes from. So, and I got angry about it, and I went on this whole, because it didn't really help me understand what white privilege meant. It was like, check your privilege, go do the work. And not everyone can do that. Not everyone has those skills. So this time was much different because I was in a space where I was willing to listen, and that conversation wasn't carried by a white woman who probably was insecure about her own privilege and therefore was trying to push, that onto me. So this time I've just been having more of a understanding that like my reaction to it, or, what do they like, how I react and how I receive, like it's okay. Like I can't get defensive because in a lot of these cases, you just need to hear people out. I can't tell them that their experiences are invalid. They can't tell me that my experiences are invalid, but we can understand the differences between our two experiences. I've had to do a lot more work to get to that vulnerable space of understanding that just because of the way that I look, I live in a completely different world, which I don't think I really grasped the first time that this person had the conversation with me. And in that vulnerability, I had to also be able to have really difficult conversations about race that I would be slightly embarrassed to, or ask questions. There is some social navigation in this space, and it depends, because some people say, well, you can't say that, and don't call your black friends and ask them, they can't do the work for, and social media is different than it was. And there's a lot of show, again, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of pushing people in a direction, and knowing about myself that the greatest change comes within, listening, understanding, finding things that I can identify with, and just staying open to having conversations where I might sound like an asshole. But, and then someone going, okay, no, see, actually, you sound like an asshole. And I go, okay, yeah, I sound like an asshole. All right, let's move past it.
Challenging how your friends speak. If you have a friend who is constantly saying they're uncomfortable around minorities, challenge them and find out why. If they're constantly talking over minorities when they're telling them their issue or their pain or their suffering, challenge them and find out why. Because a lot of racism and racist behavior is covert. It's not this, it's covert, it's learned and it's ingrained, and it becomes a part of us in a way that it feels really hard and cutting for somebody to be like, you're a racist. It feels really hard and was traumatic. It's not as traumatic as, actually experiencing racism, I will say. However, it is still a level of trauma that people are experiencing when, people call them racist. Anti-racist examples I also harken back to is thinking. So like, if I'm challenging my own thinking to this kind of like introspective way of challenging yourself is also important. If I, I'll just, pick on white folks for a second. If I'm white in a community, how am I understanding my relationship to the minority persons in my community, the people who serve me, the people who historically, particularly in Harrisburg, are cleaning, serving me at the hospital, serving me in different places? How do I understand my relationship to them? How do I interact with them? And challenging any kinds of preconceived notions I have about who these people are in my community. So there's lots I could go on about this, but there's lots of different ways to challenge anti-racist thinking and anti-racist behaviors. One of my favorites is with tone policing. When you tone police someone, especially as somebody in the dominant culture, how do you think that tone policing is being perceived? And are you attacking the person because of who they are and not because of their message? There's a ton we can do. So yes, there are tons of ways to kind of pinpoint anti-racist behaviors. And it's not enough to be like, I'm not racist. This is something that Ibram X. Kendi goes over in his book, and a couple of people, Dr. Amanda Camp and a couple other folks, but they go over this kind of work. It's not enough to be like, well, I'm not racist, because that takes the onus off of you to be actively working towards eradicating racism in the community. So it's not enough. It's not enough just to say, well, I'm not racist, so I don't have to worry about it. No. You have to eradicate it in the community. You have to look at the structures. You have to look at the rules. You have to look at the different things that are happening.
I've tried to think through lately how I respond to difference, how I respond to others, and do that in a gracious way, in a hospitable way, not in a hostile way. And that includes thinking about how I respond and engage my own beliefs. Part of the problem with privilege and structural racism is that I grew up in a place that was just like me, and that was normal. We didn't have diversity. We didn't have difference. And we definitely didn't respond to diversity and difference with a sense of welcoming it as a gift and as something that makes us better, but more as difference in the sense of well, you might change what we have, right? You might fear and uncomfortability with disrupting the status quo. So personally, in some of my reflections about being white, I've had to think a lot about growing up white, growing up in the country, growing up without diversity, and recognizing that that's part of what racism has done to me. It's disconnected me from brothers and sisters from all tribes, all nations, and made me believe that that's normal and that I don't need them.